Welcome to EPG Pathshala on the subject Social Medicine and Community Health. I am Professor C.P. Mishra, working in the Department of Community Medicine, Institute of Medical Sciences, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. I shall be discussing the module Ventilation. This module belongs to the paper Environmental Health, which is we all know that a lot of emphasis is being placed on environmental health, and among the various components of environment that has to be looked at the peripheral level, at the household level, one is water supply, housing, and 4F means fecal disposal, fly control, food hygiene, and finger hygiene. Among the housing, we consider three important parameters. One is extent of physical and social overcrowding. Then we also look at the situation of ventilation within the house, and third important component is lighting. So ventilation occupies a very key position in provision of optimal environment health. Ventilation provides a conducive environment, and people living in those houses which has adequate ventilation have better physical health, and their mental performance and mental abilities and work concentration is more because of having a very comfort zone for different type of activity. This module has been developed by a team comprising of myself as principal investigator, Dr. V.M. Gupta, ex-professor and head of the Department of Community Medicine, IMS, BHU, Varanasi, has coordinated the paper on environmental health, and this module has been written by Dr. Milli Mishra of the Department of Community Medicine, Institute of Medical Sciences, Barabanki, Uttar Pradesh, and the module has been reviewed by Dr. J. Tandon, ex-professor and head, Department of Community Medicine, IMS, BHU, Varanasi. The learning objectives that has been set for this session is: number one should understand the concept of ventilation and air exchange rates. Number two, enumerate different types of ventilation. Number three, enlist the standards of ventilation. Number four, describe the ventilation requirement of different areas. Now, ventilation has been considered in a different manner with the passage of time. In earlier days, it primarily concentrated on exchange of air, that is, the indoor air is being replaced and outside air is coming inside the house. In the modern day practice, ventilation not only implies intentional introduction of outside air inside into a room, or replacement of vacated air of the room with fresh air from outside by natural means or by any artificial methods, but also it mandates the control of air quality, which can be maintained by modifying, number one, temperature, controlling humidity and purity of air to enable an environment which provides thermal comfort. And once the thermal comfort is there will be sense of well-being and provides protection from various types of infection. So, we can say that ventilation not only provides comfort, but it provides a sense of well-being, and sense of well-being is directly related to physical health, mental health, social health of an individual. So we have to take into cognizance that each and every house should have adequate provision for cross ventilation, and so that the room inside the house is replaced by fresh air. And only besides replacement, we have to take into cognizance the control of temperature, humidity, and we have the air that is coming inside should be free from pathogens and other things. When a room or space is being occupied for a long time by human or animal, it is filled with bad odors. The odors may be replaced by supply of fresh air from outside by natural means or artificial methods blown into the room. Earlier, the concept of ventilation was confined to replacing bad odors, but later on, its other implications were well understood. And the amount of air needed to replace the desiccated air is called ventilated air. The rate at which the inside air is replaced by the outside air is called air exchange rate. So these two parameters, one is ventilated air and air exchange rates, are of significance in rating the quality of ventilation. When the exchange rate is low, the impurity or the pollutant level of the environmental increases. So if there is no cross ventilation or if the ventilation is inadequate, the exchange rate of air is low, and that if it is low, then the impurity or pollutant that are present inside the room will be not eliminated, and that may put hazard to the various physical health consequences. Now, ventilation can be of several types. Broadly, ventilation may be classified into 5 types. One is infiltration. Number 2 is natural ventilation. Number 3 is mechanical ventilation or artificial ventilation. Number 4, demand control ventilation. And number 5, heating ventilation and air conditioning. And each approach has a contextual significance and have distinct advantages and disadvantages. Certainly air conditioning will be the best, but air conditioning may pose other hazards. So we'll be discussing each and every method in brief. Infiltration means outside air when introduced into the house through the holes, cracks present in the wall, around the doors and windows, ceilings is called infiltrations. This process adds in temperature regulation and humidity control to a variable extent. Infiltration may be deliberate or may not be deliberate, but generally the holes and cracks through that exchange of air takes place. And the predominant function of this approach will be temperature regulation, because if the temperature is very high, if the temperature is beyond the comfort zone, then people will be feeling exhausted, they will be not physically alert and physically well and mentally alert. Natural ventilation. Natural ventilation is said to be present when the exchange of outside air and inside air takes place naturally without aid of any artificial device or mechanical systems. Particularly, India is a vast country, and socioeconomically everybody will be not in the position of having air conditioning. Emphasis is always placed on natural ventilation, and for that purpose, housing standards have been evolved in such a manner that there is a cross ventilation, and also there are enough windows and other doors and windows combined. The criteria has been let down so that there is enough natural ventilation. This system of ventilation depends upon the natural forces like direction of wind, air pressure, and ambient temperature. Generally, air flows from outside to inside, but sometimes it may so happen that the air temperature outside the room is quite high, and in that condition, maybe from the inside the air may go to outside. These are some of the potential hazards when temperature, particularly climatic conditions, are very adverse. Natural ventilation may occur in building by two methods: wind-driven, stack-driven. Wind-driven ventilation, when winds blows through a room, it is called perforation and creates a suction effect at the tail in termed as aspirations. So wind-driven ventilation, wind blows through a room. This process is known as perforation, and a suction effect at the tail end is termed as aspirations. Air flows from high density to low density. This phenomenon is achieved when the door and windows are constructed face to face, thus providing cross ventilation. Benefits of wind-driven ventilation are easily available, economic to the user, and if it controlled proves to be of great effectiveness. But the major disadvantage is its speed and directions are highly unpredictable. So, wind-driven ventilations depends on the speed of the wind and also the other provisions, but particularly the constructed area of the houses are constructed very close to each other. The wind-driven ventilation may be very low. Stack-driven ventilation, when there is a temperature difference between adjacent air flows from low temperature to high temperature zone, creating an upward stream known as stack effect. Greater the temperature difference, greater the stack effect. Air, when heated, becomes lighter and escapes through sky, light and fresh. Cool air enters through the inlet placed below. This type of ventilation is used in mills, warehouses, and industrial plants. Mechanical ventilation or artificial ventilation. Mechanical ventilation is said to exist when the ventilation system is added by an artificial device or mechanical system. This is gradually becoming more important because of in urban areas houses are constructed very close to each other, and chances of airflow is very less. And in that particular situation, added ventilation or mechanical ventilation becomes more important. This system of ventilation is used when natural ventilation fails to improve the indoor air quality or increasing the change of pollutants in the indoor. And as I said earlier, in urban areas, their demand is increasing day by day. Mechanical ventilation is provided by the various methods. One is fan, exhaust ventilation, plenum ventilation, balanced ventilation, and air conditioning. So there are various approaches through which this mechanical ventilation can be provided, and majority of the people in India, they consider fans because that is their economic reach, and fans also provide an opportunity for exchange of air. Exhausted ventilation are considered in certain specific situations. Plenum ventilation, balanced ventilation, and air conditioning, the outreach these services are very less because of cost considerations. In urban areas or in many places, entire building is air conditioned. In cold countries, because of air temperature maintenance, air conditioning of the entire building is done. But in majority of cases in Indian situations, particularly rural areas, among the mechanical ventilation, fans are the most widely used for mechanical ventilation. Ceiling fans, table fans, or floor fans, in true sense, these devices cannot provide ventilation as they practically never help in exchange of indoor air with outdoor air. But unfortunately, because of various constraints, most of the people are depending on ceiling fans, table fans, or floor fans, and by using these things, people think that they are in a comfortable zone or they are better than without these facilities. These will help in circulation of indoor air and decreases the perceived temperature, evaporation and perspiration from the skin of the occupants, and that gives a feeling of well-being. Air cooler helps to circulate cold air inside a room in a particular population in developing countries. And air coolers are quite common in India, particularly in hot summers season. Exhaust ventilation. In this system, vitiated indoor air is being expelled outside by means of an exhaust fan. In this process, a negative pressure zone is created and air flows of fresh air begins from outside to compensate the provided ventilation. This type of ventilation is used in industries, cinema halls, auditorium, and even in the bathrooms. Exhaust fans are housed near the roof and facilitate in expelling the upper layer of heated and lighted air. They are placed, generally exhaust fans are placed at the top so that the heated air, light air goes out. Plenum ventilation. In this system, fresh air is blown into the room through a centrifugal fans, thus creating positive pressure and displace the vitiated air. In plenum ventilation, what is done? That the fresh air is blown inside the room through the centrifugal fan, thus creating positive pressure and displace the vitiated air. The idea is that there should be not only exchange of air, but there should be when the fresh air is blown, the temperature is also regulated and humidity to some extent can be controlled. This system is used to supply air to the air-conditioned buildings and factories. Balanced ventilation, when the plenum ventilation is mixed with exhaust ventilation, then termed as balanced ventilation. So balanced ventilation keeps a balance between the system of introducing fresh air, blowing fresh air into the room, and also having the exhaust ventilation. In this way, the air temperature, humidity, and other factors that determine its comfortness are balanced. So just to summarize what we have discussed, that at the household level, in majority of the families in rural areas and urban areas, the emphasis is being placed on building a house that has enough opportunities for adequate ventilation. And it is always emphasized that in the house that there should be enough windows and door space so that there is adequate exchange of air from the house. Attempt is also made that there should be facility of cross ventilation so that the exchange of air from the house becomes easier. Although the concept of ventilation has changed, earlier just the bad odor is gone was considered adequate ventilation. But now it is emphasized that ventilation, the purpose of ventilation is not only the exchange of air, but to provide an environment which is very conducive to the health of the people living in that particular house in terms of thermal comfort, in terms of freedom from other diseases. Besides cross ventilation, attempts have been made in a particular situation where the natural ventilation fails to provide added ventilations in terms of artificial ventilation. And the most powerful tool that has emerged in this process is air conditioning. Air conditioning, which is defined as simultaneous control of all or at least the first three factors affecting both the physical and chemical condition of atmosphere within any confined space or room. These factors include temperature, humidity, dust bacteria, odors and toxic gases, most of which affecting the greater or the lesser degree of human health and comfort. So, if resources permit, air conditioning will be ideal for the house in terms of freedom from discomfort due to temperature, ideal humidity, freedom from bacteria. There will be no odors and toxic material that can affect human health. Whole air conditioning system acts as a cyclical process termed as refrigerating cycle, and refrigerant is provided within them. Cycle operates in 4 different processes: compressor, heating of the cooling refrigerant vapors; condenser, cooling of the vapors by exchange of outside air and condensation of the vapors to the liquid; dehumidifier or evaporator. Here pressure drops and the fluid in this element evaporates and draws heat from the surrounding, thus cooling it. Evaporator works below the dew temperature moisture collected at the in a plate underneath and drained out by a outlet pipe. And propulsion by fan. Vapors return to the compressor and the cold air is blown into the room by a fan. So basically there are 4 devices. One is compressor, another is condenser, third is humidifier or evaporator, and propulsion by fans. So this is the basic structure of a air conditioning system. The cycle repeats maintaining ventilation in the building. Demand control ventilation. In this technique of ventilation, carbon dioxide sensors are fitted in a building which regulates the ventilation rate dynamically instead of using a fixed air replacement rate. This is more important because in fixed air replacement rate may not suffice in those situations when there is overcrowding or when the human activities are more, and therefore carbon dioxide sensors can be fitted in the building and that regulates the rate of ventilation. This has an advantage of reduced energy consumption in the building. So according to demand, we can control rate of ventilation. Heating, ventilation and air conditioning. This system determines the room air distribution, how air is delivered to the room and removed from the room. This system is important when the humidity and temperature of the indoor air must be regulated to maintain the comfort, safety, healthy environment inside the building and thus overall well-being inside. After discussing different types of ventilation, we would like to discuss the third aspect, that is the standards of ventilation. What standards have been laid down? Standards are given as follows. Floor space. Optimum floor space needed for an individual is 50 to 100 square feet. This is obtained simply by taking length and breadth of the room and is one of the important parameters of ventilation. Now, while calculating the per capita floor space, infants are not counted. Children between 1 to 9 years are taken as half, and the length and breadth is measured. Total areas in the living room is calculated, and this is divided by the housing coefficient, and that gives us precisely the per capita floor space available for this. Other standards have been also let down, but floor capita space is the cubic square of area. 100 to 200 cubic feet per person per hour is optimal for human comfort. Rooms with height more than 10 feet are not suitable for ventilation, as the fresh air tend to remain lower in the position in the room. So 12 feet is ideal, and below that it is desired that there should be air conditioning systems. Another important thing we have to take into consideration is sometimes more number of people are living in one room, then there may be exchange of air becomes problematic, and there may be more order in that particular room. So it is also criteria has been devised that number of persons and number of rooms. Say for example, in one room, 2 persons, 2 room, 3 persons, 3 room, 5 persons. Like that criteria has been also evolved. And another important component is the air exchange rate, what it should be. The recommended air rate in the living room should be 2 to 3 per hour, whereas in working room it should be 4 to 6 air exchange rate per hour. So depending on if the activities are more, the air exchange rate should be higher, 4 to 6 times, whereas in common ordinary living room it should be around 2 to 3 per hour exchange rate. It is better indicator than the cubic space area. If the cooling power of the air is maintained by efficient air exchange rate, what is important that air exchange, the purpose is that it must provide cooling to the air, and so that the temperature inside the room becomes in the comfort zone. Exchange rate is said to that dip in oxygen concentration up to 18% in the air has no related effect in human physiology. Higher rate can produce draught effect and should not be allowed. So in air exchange rate, if you keep higher rates, then it can produce draught effect and should not be allowed. Ventilation requirement in different places. Ventilation requirement varies according to, as I said, it is the human activity inside the room or inside the particular place that sets the standards for ventilation requirement. In rural areas, the human dwellings are constructed by leaving an ample of space around the house. The constructed area should not be 1/3 of the total area in rural areas. Most of the houses are single-storied, so natural flow of air is well maintained and barely any need of mechanical ventilation in the rural areas exists because there is opportunity for cross ventilation. Houses are placed at different places and the chances, the probability of air exchange is higher only and only if the cross ventilation is maintained and window size is maintained adequately. However, the bad odor of animals and human beings persist, which may need mechanical system to get rid of. And therefore, in case of human beings and animals are living together, the bad odor persists, and that cannot be taken care by the exchange of air in a natural manner. That requires artificial means or mechanical system to get rid of. In urban areas, need for mechanical system of ventilation is of utmost important because the housings are, though the standard will let down that the constructed area should not be 2/3 of the entire area, but in many places we have seen that houses are very close to each other and chances of air movement are very, very less. In that particular situation, unless there is a mechanical system of ventilation, we can't ensure adequate ventilation in urban areas. And mechanical system of ventilation requires other energy sources, supply electricity, and to run a fan or to run a system. And the energy crisis may also affect the extent of adequate ventilation, optimum ventilation provided in urban areas. The buildings are of multi-storied and overcrowded, which restricts the natural airflow. Rise of temperature in surroundings due to the presence of many industries nearby disturb the natural property of the air. Even air conditions at family level, they may throw heated air outside. Moreover, due to overcrowding and improper sanitation, bad odor is prevailing near the human dwellings. So the basic premise that adequate ventilation will take care of bad odor, that is it. Not always true in urban settings because of the prevailing surroundings which is not fit for human dwelling, improper sanitation or improper disposal of garbage and refuse in urban solid waste management. So it requires, though we are talking about ventilation, but ventilation is also closely linked to the system of solid waste disposal in a particular area. A lot of emphasis is being placed on Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, under Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and it is sincere efforts are being made so that the surroundings are clean. As I said earlier also, that housing does not mean only building. Housing depends, the quality of house depends on the micro districts, the immediate surroundings, and immediate surroundings should be free from solid waste. Solid waste or garbages, so that the ambience of the house becomes neat and clean and optimum for the health of the persons who are dwelling in them. In the residential setups, people use mechanical ventilation in the forms of air coolers, air conditioners, or simply fans, depending on the socio-economic status. So, in residential setups, this is the usual pattern we find in many countries, many places in India. But one thing goes without saying, that the efficacy of these systems depend on power supplies, and in many places we will find that power supplies on the regular basis, and this puts on a hardship on the ventilation, adequate ventilation in residential environment. There is mostly erratic supply of power in the developing world, as I said just now, so that urban poor mostly depend on natural ventilation and rely on fans and air coolers for their mechanical ventilation. And sometimes artificial fans many people use just to enhance the movement of air close to his or her body, and just this gives a sense of well-being to them to some extent. Industries and factories are equipped with both commercial and natural system of ventilation. In post-disaster, when large mass of community is displaced and sheltered in a temporary accommodation, proper ventilation and sanitation is to be ensured in those settings by means of exhaust fan and supply of air from outside mechanically. Many times when disaster occurs, as we all know that disasters is an event that is beyond the coping capacity of the local authorities, and there are other priorities in terms of provision of safe water, food and other things. Many people think that so many people have been provided a shelter. But if the conditions are not conducive in terms of ventilation, that may cause many other health problems, particularly ear infections, heat discomfort, physical exhaustion, and sometimes that may lead to extreme fatigue and dehydration. The factors determining differences in the ventilation are direction of the locally prevailing wind direction. That is not within the control of because it is a natural forces that operate on a larger scale. At local scales or temporary periods, wind direction of wind can be modified. Number of persons residing in the room, building size and the floor area, surroundings of the building like proximity to industries and any factories, and also if there is a heap of garbage that may cause a nuisance for the adequate ventilation. Types of building, bungalows, multi-story building, temporary shelters, tents and so on. Geographical location of the building like closeness to the sea or large water body, mountain bodies that may promote or that may be a promoting factor for adequate ventilation. Nature of work carried out inside the building, if it is a heat generating process, or it may lead to ventilation problems. Now, before we come to an end, we would like to summarize that within the housing setup, certainly we have to take care of overcrowding, we have to take care of lighting, adequate lighting, but most important is we have to ensure adequate ventilation so that people get fresh air, people get air that makes the environment conducive for their health in terms of temperature, in terms of humidity, in terms of a sense of well-being, and it protects from various diseases. Just to summarize, in modern practice, the concept of just vitiating bad odor is the purpose of ventilation has gone, and now we consider that ventilation includes exchange of air as well as control of air quality by modifying the temperature, humidity and purity to enable the environment which provides thermal comfort, sense of well-being and provide protection from infection. India is a vast country, majority of people living in the rural areas, electric supply is erratic and most of the people have to depend on natural ventilation. But unfortunately, the buildings constructed in rural areas, maybe because of protection reason or security reason, the windows are not adequate, opportunities for cross ventilation are minimal, and that decompromises the adequate ventilation, and that may pose serious discomfort on them. Mechanical ventilation is gaining importance because of, particularly in urban areas, because of overcrowding, congested buildings, and less opportunity for natural air to provide adequate ventilation. So different type of ventilation exist: mechanical ventilation or artificial ventilation, demand-driven ventilation, air conditioning. These have evolved, but they have context-specific benefits. Each and every person in the country cannot have air conditioning. Coolers is also of a limited outreach. Most of the people are depending on fans. We have to consider various aspects which determines adequate ventilation. Housing standards have been evolved to take care of ventilation. Number of people living in a particular room, that is the important consideration. And also the immediate district, that is surroundings, that is micro district of the housing has a very significant impact. But there should be no compromises on adequate ventilation because it affects not only physical health, it affects mental health, it affects social health, and it is also associated with the quality of life of the people. Thank you very much for visiting EPG Varsala.